In other words, the Syrian people, right? Since the beginning from Tunisia, through Egypt, through Libya, and many of these uprisings have obviously failed, Qatar, Bahrain, we had seen hundreds of thousands of people who actually were civilians who rose up against their regimes, like any one of us in this country see it as a right, like we saw in the water charges movement. And by the way, we were told in Ireland people never protest because people are brainwashed. And suddenly we have 200,000 people on the streets of this country of a 4.5 million people. Put it into scale of London or New York or whatever, you know, it gives you the same scale. And we did. So when you look at Syria, starting at the very beginning in 2011, the people rose from Islamist background, from secularist background, from Alawite background, from Sunni background. They rose in various fragile sort of cooperation, but their demand was bread, democracy, and freedom. So in one sense, we don't have a representative voice possible of the people of Syria, but I'm from Turkey, and I have been to Syrian border many, many times, and I have also spoken to some of the 2.7 million refugees from Syria. Yes, some are fleeing ISIS. Yes, some are fleeing the Turkish intervention in the northern Syria, Kurdistan, and yes, many are fleeing Assad and the bombing that Assad does upon its own people. The response of the regime to revolt in 2011 was not a democratic, open, transparent, respectful to human rights response. It was a all-out war, which then gave, I think, all the sort of platform to all the proxies in the region, including Turkey, Iran, Hezbollah, and ISIS, of course, having emerged from the American imperialism destruction of Iraq. ISIS didn't emerge in 2011. It emerged from 2003 and 4 destruction of Iraq. At the time when Shias and Sunnis were actually trying to revolt against American presence and sort of cuts and austerity in Iraq, which we didn't hear, of course. So that turned into a civil war. But we cannot forget the fact that people rose up against the dictator. Like in every country, ordinary, normal people do sometimes rise up and have certain demands. Assad's response was an all-out military response, and it created a civil war today that all imperialist powers, be it the Russian, be it the sub-imperialist powers, be it the Americans, who have of course a long history in the region, have actually used to fight a proxy war. Actually, it's a war against each other over the lands of, over the skies of Syria.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, just so I can make a point, mostly the speakers who've spoken previously, I think sort of create an equivalence between the Americans and the jihadists and the Israelis and the British and the French and all these other imperialists, and saying that they're the same as the Russians, the sort of Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, Gaddafi, forever. I think that's actually, in my opinion, I look at that as a complete red herring, and I think it actually sort of takes away from the real forces, global forces that are playing in the world. However unattractive the Assad or Gaddafi regimes may have been, there's no evidence that I've actually heard, convincing evidence that suggests that the risings against those regimes were actually popularly mandated. It might have been put away across that way in the media, but there's certainly, like, if you actually look, especially in Libya, like how the people there retrospectively at least sort of support the collapse of the Gaddafi regime, given the state of that country now. And I'd imagine that would be something similar in Syria as well. What happened in those two? I didn't interrupt you, so.
Question.
So the point is, like, if you actually, what's happened in Syria and in Libya is basically an imperialist assault, but with a coalition of forces using jihadists and proxies, but they're being funded and supported by outside forces. That's the point what makes it. So I just want, basically what I just want to say is I think creating that kind of equivalence is a complete red herring.
Okay, thank you. So do you want to comment?
Yeah, I appreciate all these points that were made. I think maybe we ought to get down to what happened today, or what happened this past month, maybe what happened this past year, and I'll try to be brief. In September of 2015, the Russians began to send aircraft and other heavy military equipment down into Syria. We watched that. We didn't quite know exactly what they were up to. But when Mr. Putin met with Mr. Obama at the end of September at the UN, it was the 30th of September, he said, and it's very clear, look, Mr. President, we're not really impressed by your war against the jihadis, by your war against ISIS. We have skin in this game. We have no ocean between us and jihadis. We have a real problem in places like Chechnya, in the southern underbelly of Russia. And so we're going to defeat these people. We're going to do it partly by military means with our aircraft, and we invite you to join us in facing what we consider to be the worst threat, far worse than Assad in Damascus. You tend to give priority to getting rid of him. We don't understand that, really. We think the real challenge is these jihadis. So will you join us? And to his credit, Obama said, okay. And he asked John Kerry, and Lavrov was asked by Putin, get together, make sure the planes, our aircraft don't, what do they call it, deconflict the flights, make sure they don't run into each other, right? And then get together, get a big group, get a group of stakeholders to see if we can work this out the way we used to do at Geneva or Vietnam. Or, we used to get together and talk about these things and figure out if there's a way better than war. And that happened, okay? And that culminated on the 9th of September with a limited ceasefire agreement that Kerry and Lavrov tried a couple times to do, and they finally concretized it and announced it. It was to go into effect on the 12th of September. This year, yeah. Last month, a month ago. So what happened? Well, it started off reasonably well. There was a cessation of hostility. And then all of a sudden, the U.S. Air Force bombed known Syrian army positions that had been there on the top of that mountain for 6 months. U.S. Air Force said, oh, sorry, it was a mistake. Did the Russians believe that? No way do the Russians believe that. Do I believe that? No way do I believe that. I've talked to all the experts I know in the Air Force and the intelligence business. This was no mistake. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine the ceasefire, and it was insubordination on the part of that Air Force general. He should have been fired on the spot if Obama had any guts. So what happened? The ceasefire implodes, right? And then the Russians announce, and Putin tells his defense ministry, look, you tell him this. And the general gets up and he says, look, we're going to shoot down anything that flies over Syria, okay? It was a missile, aircraft, even a stealth aircraft, we can handle that. So we don't want any surprises, okay? And besides that, Syria is pretty small, and so when we see an unidentified aircraft or missile, we're not going to have time to figure out what the origin of that is. So that's it. What am I saying? I'm saying the Russians put in a no-fly zone over Syria a couple of days after the ceasefire imploded. Do you guys know that from the public press? No, very few of you know that. It wasn't even reported in the New York Times, okay? Why? Because when a U.S. plane gets shot down, the Times wants to say, out of the blue, without any warning, the Russians shot down one of our, that's the game, okay?
But didn't Obama try to put in a no-fly zone after that?
Say again?
Obama tried to put in a no-fly zone, which was reported after that. There was talk of a no-fly zone.
To ground Russia and Syria in aircraft solely, but a US enforced one, which is effectively cans in disguise to the very force who created this entire crisis to begin with.
That's sort of,
I mean,
that's not very realistic, that nobody can fly something. So what I'm saying here is that the issue is joint, okay? And the Russians mean business. And Putin said 3 days ago in Valdai at that conference, I worked these things out with the American president, but there are forces in Washington that undercut that. I don't know who to believe anymore, okay? Now, he's got 6, 7 weeks before a new president comes in. What's he going to do? He's going to fortify his position in Syria so that it's as strong as possible before a new president comes in. He's going to do the same thing vis-a-vis Ukraine. It's the only option he has. He's quit playing this little game with Kerry, who can't deliver on his promises, and with Obama, who can't deliver on his promises. And the big thing is, for the Russian allies, he's saying this openly. And Lavrov's foreign ministry spokesman, that wonderful woman, Zakharova,